There was a tree that flavored the childhood of near every American who ever lived, and then the government made it disappear right off the shelves. Picture a summer porch in 1950-something, a cold brown bottle sweating in a boy's hand, the smell of it rising up sweet and rooty before the first sip. That smell came from a wild tree that grew in the woods behind that house, free for the taking. And here is the thing they never told you, friend. The reason they pulled that tree out of your soda pop was not really the reason they gave you. You were told it was about your health. It was not. It was about something else entirely, and by the end of this I am going to show you exactly what and who decided it, and why the same chemical they said would kill you is still sitting legal in the spice rack in your kitchen right now. For 100 years, the people who sold you flavor told you a simple story. They said the old drink was dangerous, that it caused cancer, that they took it away to protect you and your children, and most folks nodded and drank the new version and never thought twice. But that is not the whole story. We did not lose this tree because it failed us. We lost it because it worked too well and because it became useful to somebody in a way that had nothing to do with root beer and nothing to do with your liver. The old people knew this tree by name. They dug it, they brewed it, they thickened their supper with it, and they trusted it for 300 years before a single law was ever written about it. That trust was not foolish. It was earned generation by generation, and then in one stroke of a pen it was made to look like ignorance. I want to give it back to you tonight, honest and plain, the good and the caution both. My name is Amos, and for 60 years I have dug roots like ginseng and golden seal out of these mountain hollows, the same plants my grandmother named for me before I could read. I am not a doctor, and nothing I say here is medical advice. Real quick before we start, most folks who watch this channel are not subscribed. If you love the old plants, especially the ones they made disappear, go ahead and hit subscribe. It is free, and it helps an old root man keep making these. Alright, let's walk back to where this story starts. Long before there was a United States, before there was a bottle of soda pop or a corner store to sell it in, this tree was already sacred. It grew from Maine down to Florida and clear west to eastern Texas, a whole wall of it through the eastern woods. And the people who lived here knew it better than we ever will. The Choctaw, the Cherokee, the Timucua down in Florida, who called it by their own name for it, they all leaned on this one tree. They dug the roots and boiled them into a tea for fevers and colds, and for what they called cleaning the blood in the spring, when the winter had left a body heavy and slow. They mashed the leaves into poultices for wounds and swellings. They chewed the bark for their teeth. This was not a garnish, friend. This was a medicine chest growing wild in the yard. Now let me tell you the one use that outlived all the others, because you have probably eaten it and not known it. Down in Louisiana, the Choctaw taught the Creole cooks to take the young leaves, dry them, and grind them into a fine green powder. They call it file. And that powder is the very thing that thickens a real pot of gumbo and gives it that deep, earthy body. To this day, a Louisiana cook will shake file into the pot after the fire is off, and every grain of it is ground sassafras leaf, the same plant the old tribes used 8, 9, 10,000 years back. Think on that, a tradition that old, still simmering on a stove tonight. The name itself carries an old promise. Some say it comes from a Latin word meaning stone breaker, because the tea was trusted to break up and pass a kidney stone. I will tell you plain that scholars argue over that root of the word, so take it as a story more than a certainty. But the reputation was real enough that when the first hungry Europeans landed here and did not know how to survive, it was this tree that carried some of them through. Because here is where it stops being a quiet woodland remedy and becomes one of the most valuable things in the entire world, and that is the part I am building you towards, so stay with me. When the English tried to plant that first shaky colony at Roanoke in 1585, they were starving and sick, strangers in a land that did not feed them. And they found that the boiled leaves and roots of this tree gave them something to fill the belly, a slick mucilage that carried real calories and settled a sour stomach. It kept people alive. The Spanish down in Florida had learned the same lesson from the Timucua a couple decades before that, and a Spanish doctor wrote it all down and sent word back across the ocean, and that word set off something close to a gold rush. Understand the world it landed in. Europe in the late 1500s was being torn apart by a terrible new disease, and the doctors had nothing that worked. Then here comes a rumor of a miracle wood from the New World that cures what nothing else can touch. Now I will be honest with you the way I promised. It did not cure that disease. Nothing they had did. But the tea was not snake oil either. It genuinely eased inflammation, it fought some infection, it helped the digestion, and made a suffering body feel better. So the demand did not just grow. It exploded. They say Columbus himself claimed he could smell this tree on the wind before he ever saw the shore. That one is likely a tall tale, and I will flag it as such, but this next part is cold, hard history. The wood got so precious that by 1602 a single shipment carried back to England weighed a full ton, a ton of tree bark and root, and it fetched a price that, pound for pound, folks, compared to the price of gold, that is not a figure of speech I am reaching for. Traders wrote home about bark worth its weight in gold, and I will let you decide how literal to take an excited merchant, but the value was staggering either way. It got so valuable that in 1603, a sea captain named Martin Pring sailed all the way out of Bristol, England, crossed the whole Atlantic Ocean for the main purpose of loading his ships with this one tree. He found it, he filled his holds, and he came home a wealthy man. For about 50 years, in the earliest days of the American colonies, this tree was the second largest export leaving these shores, beaten only by tobacco. Not furs, not timber, a wild root that grew for free in the woods, second only to tobacco. That is how badly the world wanted it. But greed cuts its own throat, and here is the loss folded into the boom. The most prized part, the part richest in that famous oil, was the bark of the root. And to get the root bark, you kill the tree. So they dug, and they dug, and they stripped whole forests. By 1626, the colonists could not even fill their export orders anymore. They had nearly wiped it out along the coast. Now the tree was tougher than they were, and it came springing back up from surviving roots and scattered seed the way it always does. But hold on to that word oil, friend. That oil, the very thing that made the tree worth its weight in gold, is the same thing that is going to get it outlawed 300 years later. We will get to why in just a moment. Because the tree did come back, and when it did, America found a brand new way to love it. In the 1840s, folks started taking that same root, sweetening it, and bubbling it up into a fizzy drink. They called it root beer, and it swept the country. By the year 1900, every corner store in America had it. Grandmothers still brewed the old spring tonic from the root out back. Southern cooks still kept their jar of file on the shelf. Men whose names you learned in school, the founding generation, had grown up on this same root tea. It was woven right through the whole American century, from the medicine chest to the supper pot to the soda fountain. And one man built an empire on it. His name was Charles Hyers, a Philadelphia druggist, and in the 1870s he took this root drink and bottled it and sold it to the whole nation as Hyers root beer. He marketed it as the wholesome, healthy choice, the temperance drink, the thing a good family could pour instead of liquor. He got rich. Root beer became as American as anything you can name. Your parents drank it, their parents drank it, and every single bottle of the real thing was flavored by the oil of this wild tree. So now you have to ask the question this whole video has been circling. If this tree fed the starving, healed the sick, built fortunes, and flavored the childhood of an entire nation for 300 years, then how in the world did it just vanish? Why can you not buy a true Sassafras root beer today? What happened? Here is the part I promised you, and it comes in 2 layers, and the second layer is the one they never wanted you to think about. The first layer is the one you were told. In 1960, the Food and Drug Administration announced that the active oil in this root, a compound called safrole, had caused liver cancer and tumors in laboratory rats. On the strength of those studies, they banned safrole from all mass-produced food and drink, writing it into the federal code as a poisonous and deleterious substance. And just like that, it was over. The root beer companies swapped the real oil for an artificial, safrole-free flavor overnight. The tea vanished off the store shelves, and within a single generation, a tradition 300 years deep was as good as dead. Grandchildren grew up thinking sassafras was a candy flavor, not a plant. Now, I promised you honesty, so let me be square about those rat studies because I will not overstate the health side to you. Safrole in large amounts is not something to play with, and the animal studies were real, but look close at the doses. The rats were given safrole at levels that, scaled to a person, worked out to something like drinking dozens of bottles of root beer every single day for months on end. Not 1 bottle, not 10, dozens day after day. That is not a child on a porch with a cold soda. That is a dose no human being would ever come near from traditional use, and here is a thing modern researchers are only starting to whisper about, so I offer it to you as a careful suggestion and nothing more. There is early work hinting that safrole in very small amounts may behave altogether differently in the body than it does in a flood. I am not telling you it is protective. I am telling you the science is not as closed a book as 1960 made it sound. So if the danger from normal use was that thin, why did the ban land so hard, and why has it never once loosened in all the years since? That brings us to the second layer, the real one, and I will name it plainly, the villain, the year, and the mechanism the way I always do. Because here is what changed. In the 1960s and into the 1970s, underground chemists figured out something the FDA never mentioned. That same oil, safrole, is the perfect starting material to cook into a street drug. Run it through the right chemistry, and safrole becomes MDA, and then MDMA, the drug the kids call ecstasy or Molly. Safrole is the skeleton the whole drug is built on, and that changed everything for the men who make the rules. Think about the corner they were in. This tree is native. It grows wild across roughly 20 states. You cannot send agents into the Appalachian woods to chop down millions of trees that have grown here since before the country existed. You cannot ban a forest, but you can ban the oil. So the Drug Enforcement Administration took safrole and made it a List I chemical, the same tightly watched list that governs the ingredients for cooking methamphetamine. It became unlawful to knowingly possess or sell or distribute safrole if you mean for it to become a drug. The tree stayed legal, the oil got the handcuffs. And now the whole thing snaps into focus, does it not? Here is the fact that gives the game away. Safrole is not some rare poison found only in this one tree. It is in your kitchen, it is in nutmeg, it is in cinnamon, and in black pepper, and in sweet basil, and in star anise. Nutmeg, by some accounts, carries even more of it than sassafras does, though I will flag that comparison as reported rather than nailed down. And yet nobody has banned nutmeg. Nobody writes to your grandmother about her cinnamon. Why? Because you cannot efficiently cook those spices down into ecstasy. The safrole is locked up in them in a way that does not serve a drug lab, but the concentrated oil of the sassafras root that you can, so that is the one they came for. Do you see it now, friend? The ban was never really about the cancer, and it was never really about protecting the boy on the porch. It was about control. It was about a chemical that had become useful to make a drug the government was at war with. Now, I am not going to sit here and tell you this was a conspiracy cooked up in a locked room by men in dark suits. It was not. It was control, plain as that. It was the machinery of a drug war reaching out and grabbing the nearest lever, and the nearest lever happened to be a tree that had fed and healed this land for 3 centuries. The tree got erased as collateral, and you got told it was for your own good. You want the proof of how serious that lever became? Let me give you the record breaker. In June of 2015, up in Canada, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police raided a business that was supposedly making candles. What they found instead was sassafras oil. Not a bottle, not a barrel, 1,500 kilograms of it. That is more than 3,300 pounds of concentrated root oil, better than 1.5 tons, and the police stated that that single stash could have been cooked into roughly 4.2 million tablets of ecstasy. 4.2 million. From an oil that 100 years back a Louisiana grandmother kept in a jar to thicken her gumbo. That is the collision at the heart of this whole story. The kitchen and the crime lab, the same tree. So let me tell you where that leaves you tonight, because I would not walk you all this way just to make you sad about a soda pop. Here is the practical truth, and hear it careful. The tree itself is not illegal. You can walk out into the woods across some 20 states and find it growing wild, and for your own personal use you can forage it, the leaves and the root both. You learn to know it by its leaves, and this is the sweet part, because it wears 3 different leaf shapes on the very same branch. One shaped like a plain oval, one shaped like a mitten with a thumb, and one with 3 lobes like a little trident. No other tree in our woods does that. Scratch the twig and it smells of that old root beer, and you will know it in your bones. Use it the way the old people did, modest. A tea from the root now and again the way your great-grandmother took her spring tonic, not gallons of it, not every hour. Use it traditional and use it small, and understand what the actual line of the law is. Whatever you do, don't go trying to distill or sell or ship the concentrated oil, because that and only that is the thing that is truly against the law. The government does not care about your cup of tea. It cares about that oil going to a drug lab. So keep it in the old way, the small way, the porch and the supper pot way, and you are standing exactly where your ancestors stood. And listen to me, because this next thing matters most of all. If you grew up thinking this tree was just a flavor of candy, a thing that never really existed except as a smell, that is not on you. You were not taught to forget it by accident. A whole tradition was pulled up out from under you before you were old enough to hold a cup, and no one your age was ever told the real reason. That is not your ignorance, that is somebody else's choosing. Because in the end, this was never truly a story about a tree, or about soda pop, or even about a drug. It is a story about who gets to decide what you are allowed to know, and what your own grandmother was allowed to hand down to you. A plant grew wild and free on this land for 10,000 years. It fed the starving, and it healed the sick, and it flavored a nation, and then it became inconvenient to the people who draw the lines, and so it was made to disappear from your life without your say. When you learn to spot those 3 little leaves on a branch, and you know what they are and what was done to them, you are taking back a small piece of something that was taken from you. You are being a person who cannot be so easily managed. That is worth more than any bottle they will ever sell you. Now I want to hear from you, so drop me a comment below and tell me just 2 things. First, do you remember the taste of real sassafras, the true root, from when you were young, or is it gone from your part of the country entirely? And second, what other old plant do you reckon got pushed out of our lives not because it failed us, but because it got in somebody's way? I read as many of these as I possibly can, and the stories you tell me never cease to amaze me. Thank you for spending this time with me here in the Hollow. Look after yourselves, and come walk the woods with me again. And do subscribe before you go, because next time I am going to tell you about a common little weed that grows in nearly every ditch and driveway in America, a plant they spray by the truckload to kill, and that the old herb doctors once trusted more than almost anything else in the woods. There is a reason nobody wants you to know its name. I will see you then.